Okay, so good evening to all of you. On behalf of the Department of Chemical Engineering, I'd like to welcome you all to the first Shrimati Sarla Doshi Memorial Lecture. I welcome our speaker for today, Dr. Tushar Gore, who is our alumnus and is currently the Managing Director at Resonance Laboratories Pvt. Limited. He has kindly accepted our invitation to be the speaker for this year's memorial lecture. Before we begin, I would request Professor Guruswamy to introduce Dr. Tushar Gore.
Thank you, Mahesh. So welcome to this first talk in the series, and especially delighted to welcome Tushar to speak as the first speaker in this series. Tushar and I did our BTechs together, so we're alumni from IIT Bombay. And in fact, in our fourth year, we spent a large part of our time in Professor Bellari's lab in the evenings. So Tushar got his BTech in chemical engineering from IIT Bombay in '94, and he was the silver medalist that year. So after he graduated from IIT Bombay, he went to the University of Minnesota, where he did his PhD in chemical engineering, working in the group of Professor Matt Tyrrell, broadly in the area of lipids and so on. After he finished his PhD, he decided to explore consulting as a career, and he worked at McKinsey for a few years before he switched to a pharmaceutical company, Novo Nordisk, where he also did not a technical but more a consulting kind of a role. Subsequently, Tushar moved back to India in about 2010, 2011. And moved back as the managing director of Resonance, which is a company that makes pharmaceutical ingredients and APIs and so on. So welcome, Tushar. It's a pleasure to have you here. Also delighted to have Pankaj and Anu, also our alumni, visit, but I'll let Mahesh formally welcome them.
Right, so today we are fortunate to have both Dr. Pankaj Doshi and Dr. Anu Raghunathan here. Both of them are alumnus of IIT Bombay. They have been associated with the department in various ways. In fact, Dr. Doshi is also the visiting honorary professor in our department. He's currently the head of predictive sciences at Pfizer Limited, and Dr. Anu Raghunathan is a senior scientist at NCL. In fact, together they have initiated various awards in the department. One is, including of course this memorial award, the others are the most impactful research, basic research paper in the year and the most impactful applied research paper to be awarded to PhD students. The others are the best UG student in reaction engineering course, and the third one being the best UG student in the thermodynamics course. Of course, these are undergraduate courses in memory of Dr. Raghunathan's father, who was a faculty in our department. Professor Raghunathan was, yeah. So this particular lecture series, which is the annual Sarla Doshi Memorial Lectures series, was instituted with the aim to invite influential technology or business leaders from the chemical industry. And I'm happy that the first lecture is today, and we have Dr. Tushar Gore to come and give the talk. I would like to invite first Dr. Tushar Gore and to felicitate him. Now I request both Dr. Pankaj and Dr. Anu to come down and sit. Okay. Right. So with that, I would invite Dr. Tushar Gore to give his talk.
Okay. First of all, huge thanks to Pankaj and Anu for giving me the honor. When Pankaj first told me about it, and I read the word influential business leader, so I was telling him, why are you talking to me? Do you need some references? I can put you in touch with some of the right people. but he insisted and he said, no, this would be a great start to the program. So again, thank you very much. And what I want to do today is talk about two things. One is, since I'm from the pharmaceutical and chemical background, give a little bit of a perspective on the industry. So, what is the chemical industry, specifically the pharma industry. Yeah, it's okay. And the second is, what the title says, academia and industry interface. So we'll just explore, what that interface is and what are some opportunities for both parties to collaborate across the interface. And I purposely use the term because, as you will see, some of my research interests, go back to interface and interfacial engineering. Okay, so let's start with that. So again, once again, thank you very much, Pankaj and Anu, and thanks to the department also for hosting me. And it's really a pleasure to be doing this. Okay, so as I said, the first part of the talk is about the chemicals and pharmaceuticals industry, large and small. I'm from a small, I run a small industry. So the definitions keep changing as per, the government definition of small and large scale industries. But basically we are about 100 people strong at this point. So I think we are classified as a small industry, but it's, to me, it's running 100 people operation is quite significantly challenging, and we'll look into why that is so. But I'll talk a bit about both large and small. What are the different questions that these industries face, and some of the one reason why I can do that is I've been at least exposed to both these industries in some capacity. So this is a little bit of my journey in chemi and out of chemi and then back to chemi. So this is first, as Professor Guru mentioned, did my PhD at Minnesota, and this is a micrograph. Last time I was in discussions here, I told Professor Bellare that I will show a micrograph, of my research. So this is from one of the papers. So my research was in peptide structures and self-assembly and colloids, and we used cryo-TM as a technique to analyze these self-assembly structures. So what this micrograph shows is some micelles, and they turn out to be disc-like micelles, which people who are familiar with colloids are pretty rare. So we found some interesting structures there. Then subsequently, right after PhD, I actually went out of chemi and joined the consulting firm McKinsey. And there it was, a junior role, starting role. So this just shows, the kind of work we would do for clients, analyzing their businesses, making, 2x2, what we call in the consulting lingo, frameworks. So I was there for a few years. And then after that, I moved on to pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk. At that time, it was known as one of the large insulin players. It still is one of the largest manufacturers of insulin, but these days it's more known for the weight loss drug Ozempic. And when I was there, they were working on the early precursors. Of course, I did not know that would, my consulting background did not train me enough to recognize that would become a large, such a large, business. And there the work was similar in the sense it was a lot about business planning and performance review of their businesses, suggesting improvement ideas and so on and so forth in marketing and strategy. Subsequently, I joined where I am presently. This is a pharmaceutical company in that we make active substances, and I'll come back to that in the next few slides. And this is a company based in Bangalore, and it was set up by my father-in-law. And so McKinsey and Novo Nordisk were both in the US. I was working in the US, and we decided to move back to India. And together with that decision was this decision to join the company. And for the last few years now, I've been running it as MD. The graphic there is meant to show that in that role, I wear a variety of different hats. Sometimes it feels I'm wearing all the hats at the same time. And that's the joy of running a small business, one can say. Okay, all right. Yeah, and I will pause when I feel it's a natural time if there are any questions in the middle, but we'll roughly about 40 minutes, then we have some time for questions. Okay. Okay, so the first, as I said, the first section of the talk is about the chemicals industry. So I think I'll be sort of talking to the, or preaching to the choir and the experts here. You all know that it's really a vast universe. It's extremely difficult actually to, what in business terms we would say, segment the chemical industry, because it spans across multiple areas. So very typically the way we would, or we think about it, or I think about it, is in terms of, okay, we start from basic chemicals, and again, depending on the person you ask, these definitions can be different, but it sort of moves from basic to intermediate to end products. And the definition of intermediates is really that there is some more processing step needed to convert it into end products. There is no sort of classical definition of what is an intermediate. It's just that you process it and you make something else, and which can then be sold to a customer. So that's really a basic definition of an intermediate chemical. And then end products, and this is just few end user industries that I've listed here. There are many more. Now, how does one think about it as a business? Okay, this is fine as a theoretical sort of concept. So now, the way industry is structured, there are few ways actually businesses are structured in the chemical industry. So the first one is the large players, what in the business lingo is called the integrated industry. So the DuPonts and the BASFs and the Reliances of the world, they make everything, they start with the basic chemicals and they will pick and choose. So it's not necessary that they will only go over here. There could be some streams on other end products as well. So one industry type or one business type is around this integrated concept. The second one is there are industries that develop expertise around specific chemistries or specific type of processing. So the graphic here is meant to show that these can happen anywhere in the chain, so to speak. So you could be doing, so for example, phosgenation is one where, in pharma there are needs for phosgenation. We don't do that, but there are industries that are experts and that only focus on the phosgenation process or using phosgene gas. And that could happen anywhere. It could be in a transformation of a basic chemical to an intermediate across different streams. It could be from an intermediate to an end product. It could be between different end products. So it really depends on where that expertise and that process is required. And finally, it's the sort of the most mundane definition is the end use. So what I have listed out here, whether it's an agrochemical, electronic chemical, pharmaceutical, based on where the product and the substance is used. So roughly that's how the industry is segmented. Okay, then now we'll come on to the pharmaceuticals aspect of the chemical industry, which is where we are competing in and we are manufacturers of. So what we do is we make the chemical ingredient, which is, so here I have shown a molecule called atropine sulfate. We actually make this molecule. Actually, this is interesting. I don't know if people are fans of medical dramas these days. In any doctor setting or ER setting, in television shows, they will spout out names of chemicals to revive the patient or whatever. So I have noticed atropine sulfate is used many times, especially in the ER settings, because of specifically this use. It is used in injections and in the ER setting when there are low heart rates, when the patient is crashing, when their heart rate is going down, or in cases of poisoning from organophosphate like fertilizer poisoning or insecticide poisoning, atropine is used. The point is that the same chemical is used in different formulations. So it's used in eye drops for pupil dilation during an eye exam. It is used in the tablet form for stomach upsets. And this is actually a military use. This is an injection, but it is used as an injector pen in which the person can self-administer in an emergency situation to their thigh in military uses when there is a suspicion of exposure to nerve gas. So it's actually, this is quite atropine is one of the only agents that acts as an antidote to a nerve gas. So military is pretty keen, and DRDO, our own DRDO has programs to make sure they have appropriate auto injectors with these products. So the point of showing this is pharmaceuticals is really divided into two distinct segments. One is the API segment, which is where we manufacture the substance. So typically I say we make white powders, which is the API pharma ingredient, the active ingredient, and then which then goes into the finished dosage, which I showed. So the main differences, so this slide talks about now what are the differences in these two segments of pharma. So one is the type of processing. So to manufacture the API, it's mainly chemical processing. Only at the last stages we have to do centrifugation and drying and milling. But up to that point, it's all reactions, and from intermediates you have to make these APIs. For finished dose, it's all physical processing. It's blending, depending on, of course, whether we are making tablets or lotions or injections. The other important difference is the specification. So this is quite critical. The specifications for APIs is actually quite detailed, and this is set by the, I can say, the government without getting into a lot of detail. So we have to match a certain specification, we as in manufacturers of API, and those are fairly detailed in the sense that they list out all the different types of impurity, and you have to, typically it's about a 0.1% or a 0.15% of impurity level that we have to maintain. However, in finished dose, the specifications are quite, I can say, broad. The main specification for a finished dose, so for example, our Crocin tablet, it's a 500 mg tablet. The specification, it's not listed on the packaging, but the government requires that it contain anywhere from 90 to 110% of the specified dose. In some cases, it can even be 80 to 120%. So that is what is allowed for formulations. There are no, in very rare cases, there might be impurity profiles, but the impurity profile is actually controlled at the API stage. So they have to buy, when they buy the API, they are assuring that the impurity profile is controlled in the drug substance or the ingredient stage. Okay. This is also quite critical as consumers of pharmaceuticals. How are these products tested and released? So APIs, we test them as manufacturers before sending it out, that they match the spec. The customer, the finished dose manufacturer, when they receive it, they are supposed to test it and make sure that it is passing. So the API gets tested at manufacturer when we sell them and at the customer when they buy it. The finished dose, however, only the manufacturer is testing and releasing it into the market. So all the tablets, all the formulations that we buy, we have to really be sure that the manufacturer is really testing it correctly. There is no other check other than random sampling that the state governments might do at pharmacy levels. So this is actually quite an important difference. Okay. The last one is related to intellectual property. So most of the intellectual property, when we hear products are patented, most of it, again I'm generalizing for the purpose of this talk, the IP is on the API. So you will hear the term new chemical entity or NCE, where somebody has made literally a new molecule. So a new statin or a new drug, for like Novo Nordisk came up with Ozempic, that's a new molecular entity. So the patent is on that. Sorry? Yeah. So the test, for each API there is what is called a specification sheet. I use the word government, so it's actually pharmacopoeia, and it lists out all the test data, and they are different for different APIs. Typically there are purity and impurity profile, typically. Then there are other things such as infrared, sometimes they might have optical rotation, but the most common ones are purity and impurity profile. What else does it have, typically? And they are measured by HPLC, GC, those kind of tests. I'm sorry? Well, if you are sending it outside, we are supposed to have our own lab run according to certain GMP principles. We can test it in-house. If you are sending it outside, there is a requirement of accredited labs. Yeah. So I'll come to that in the regulations. So as I was mentioning, IP is typically on the molecule. In formulations, If the same molecule is used for new dosages, you can get an IP as well. But as I said, I'm generalizing. Typically, when we say, okay, has this patent expired? Like recently, there was news that Ozempic patent is expiring in a few years. So what they're talking about is this: the chemical entity patent is expiring. Okay. Okay. Then regulations. So these are across. So the API industry is regulated by the government. We need a license from the Drugs Authority of India to manufacture API, and they inspect and make sure that we manufacture according to the guidelines. The finished dose also has a similar set of regulation. Finished dose are obviously more stringent because of this situation, that the testing is only at the manufacturer. There is no further testing. So this is actually quite critical. Whereas API has some, if we make a mistake and send out some problematic contaminated API, the chances it can get caught at the formulator, right? So regulations are obviously more strict at the finished dose. They are definitely quite strict. It's not like we are having an easy time with the regulation. I mentioned the asterisks here. That's to highlight that this is again just as a basic information. In India, the regulation and the certification is by state. So manufacturer of finished dose, so let's say Crocin tablets, can be set up in Maharashtra, and the Maharashtra government, Maharashtra Drugs Authority gives them the license, but they can sell worldwide. I mean, they can sell countrywide. The reason I'm mentioning this is different states have different, they are not all the same. So like Karnataka, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Gujarat are some of the well-known states for manufacturing. But there are other states who are not well-known. So there can be some challenges because those drug authorities are giving licenses. So I don't mean to have some scare over here that you shouldn't buy products from these other states, but this is an information that we should be aware of. Okay, and related to your question, so these the regulations also cover how they should be tested, how should your lab be, since we are testing our product, those are covered in these regulations. So when they give us a license and when they come for inspections, they will check the lab as well. Okay, now for some, this was the technical. These are some market numbers. So worldwide, roughly about 1 million tons of ingredients are made and sold in terms of volume, API. And the global pharma business is worth about $1.5 trillion. Just to give a scale of what's happening in the market. Okay. Any questions on this? So yes, manufacture and sell. So it's a combined license. So it's actually manufacture, storage, and sell. So it
what is the FDA
yeah, so there is a separation of state, and the CDSU is the regulatory. So they get involved in clinical trials. They get involved in if you need an export license. So if we are manufacturing and we want to export, then there is a separate inspection which the CDSU will come and inspect according to international GMP, WHO GMP norms. So they get involved in that. But for domestic manufacture and sales, it's the state licensing authority. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so this is a fun exercise I thought we'll have. This shows top 5 molecules sold by kilograms, and of course so this is 57,000 tons. So this is old data. This is incredibly hard to get. So we typically get older data, but this is still roughly relevant, and their sales in dollars that year. So can any guesses on what the top few molecules are? So I'm asking actual molecule names. Number one, it's APIs, I mean the ingredients. Paracetamol, okay. Anything else? Yeah, it's in the top, obviously. Huh? Diabetes. Okay, yeah, diabetes is there. Amlodipine is the blood pressure one. Yeah, yeah. So that's not in the top 5, but yeah, okay. So definitely paracetamol and metformin are the top 2. Okay. Then the next, I have just, it's a antibiotic, and then the other 2 are again pain medication, aspirin, ibuprofen and aspirin. So, okay, this is just out of interest, but then the next slide will really put it in contrast. So this shows, okay, this I'm not going to ask the names because these are, I don't know if everybody's aware of these also. So these are the top 5 molecules by the sales. So the previous slide was by volume. So if you were to just contrast it, so paracetamol was 57,000 tons and had roughly $8 or $9 billion in sales. Adalimumab, volume wise it's only 1 ton volume, but the value of the product is 32 billion. So just to put it in contrast, obviously the ones on the previous slide were all generics and old molecules, and these are, most of them are branded. I think some of them have lost their, they are generics, but the dosage forms are branded. I don't know, Pankaj, you might be more aware of that. I think emtricitabine and this is HIV combination drug, which while these two are these are generic, but as a combination they are patented and they are selling the compound. But anyway, this is just to give an idea of the difference between the value and volume when it's a generic versus non-generic. Yeah. It is used for it's an antibody. I forget now because both these I'm getting confused by which one is used for what. The next two are for HIV. This one is an anti-blood clot. These two I'm mixing up yeah. I think this is some autoimmune. I think. I think autoimmune. Na? Yeah. This one is autoimmune. Yeah. Autoimmune. Yeah. Apixaban is Pfizer? Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Blood thinner. Okay? Alright. So the next few slides are, this is just the pharma landscape. So I put this to just, okay, how do we analyze the industry, like pharmaceuticals and chemicals, how is it doing? So this is an example of publicly available information. The next few slides are, slides from I think this one is by McKinsey, the next one is by Price Waterhouse. So typically, how they would analyze, or this is public information, but this is what some of the companies would do. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, just to give you a perspective. The plot is here. They have shown total stock returns of the entire segment. So this is the chemical sector. This is a comparator of all the non-chemicals companies. The point I'm making is chemicals had a good run, but recently the stock returns have come down. That's the point I'm making. And then in the report, these are some recommendations. So now this is where the challenge comes when we are a large versus a small company. So me as a small company, I'm reading this, grow, okay, fine, at stable costs, okay, I don't want to increase my cost structure, fine. Continue investment in innovation. This is verbatim, by the way, I haven't changed it, just maybe I've removed some prepositions or something. Okay, that's fine. Obviously we want to innovate is always a good thing. Manage consolidation in a supply chain, so that's a little bit technical. Leverage technology, yes, now they talk about AI and all in the report. Redefine geographic presence. So again, these are for large companies. Where you want to play. Do you want to play in India, China? You want to focus on where you are strong. So these are some of the things that the larger companies this is the kind of advice the large companies get. So this was for chemicals. It's a similar thing for pharmaceuticals. So PLS is pharma and life sciences. So this is from PricewaterhouseCoopers. So again, the way they do it is they set up the issue. So the issue they are saying is the return for pharmaceuticals has been below par compared to the overall stock returns. So they have given some time points. So they are saying, something is broken in pharma, so you got to fix it. And these are some of the ways to fix it. Where will the value unlock come from? So how will you, get the value from your business? So one is you can be an R&D disruptor. One is asset light scale optimizer, patient centric revolutionary, therapeutic area captain. So these are kind of words people use in the boardrooms in large companies to say, okay, we know what we are talking about. As you can see, I'm a bit skeptical about this approach, but this is just to highlight, this is really what happens when we are in a large company. These are the types of conversations that are going on. Okay, how do I become an asset light scale optimizer? I mean, I've been in these situations. I won't be able to tell you what that means, right? So I am assuming somebody there was telling, and whoever was the recipient, could understand it, right? So what I'm trying to explain or draw your attention to is, in large versus small, the world I live in large industries, it's like I call it a word salad of all these strategic terms. So all kinds of things you can, we used to have a game we could play, we used to say, I don't know if everybody's familiar with bingo. The person calls out the number and you mark. So we used to have all these terms. So whenever we are hearing a presentation, whoever hears all the 20 terms called out, shouts out bingo. So yeah, so there is some value, for example, looking at value proposition, really understanding what we are bringing to the customer, will they pay for it? But it's an in-depth study. It cannot be, one slide saying, be a leader in your segment. You have to really understand, okay, what does the customer want? What do they want? How much will they pay for it? Can we sustain it? Capacity and cost curve. This is actually quite important for the large companies. Because, for example, paracetamol, if we go back to that slide, it's a 57,000 tons. Now, India apparently has about 10 or 15,000 ton capacity. I think there are 6 or 7 players in India. Now, if I'm an Indian player and I want to set up capacity, if I make over capacity, I'm going to bring down prices. The API price of paracetamol is about 200 rupees per kg. So the white powder sells at 200. I mean, that's shocking, right? It's really low. Metformin is also about that, 250 or something. So if somebody decides, I really want to make these molecules, it's important for them to understand. First of all, you can't make 500 kg, 1 ton. You have to think hundreds of tons. So you need to understand the capacity, whether you will be able to match, what will the competitor do? If I suddenly dump 10, 15, 20 tons of paracetamol in the market, what's going to happen? And can I sustain that? Do I really have that, cost presence? So not all is kind of fluff. There are some real analyses. But we have to be careful on differentiating what is real and what is fluff. Total API manufacturing, I don't know. You're saying out of the, I think this slide talked about the 1 million tons of API, right? I don't know out of that how much happens in India. No, API, so we get the intermediates, but India does make the API. So for example, US, I think about 40% of their generic volume comes from India, drugs manufactured in India. So that's one estimate of, I can't give you a number on what percentage of the 1 million is manufactured in India. I don't know that. Moved out of India. Yeah, I think it has gone to China, right? Yeah, because of the cost. So I think the cost for this, amoxicillin, I learned is about, in India, it's about 2,000 rupees per kg. So I don't know what the Chinese is. That's about 2,000. No, this is total worldwide. I was just giving an example of, if somebody is thinking of making paracetamol or some of these large products, as a large company, we have to think through these things, capacities and, big questions. Like for me, I won't think about that. We are not making those. Okay. Yeah. So in SME, I'm making it as, we are doing less thinking. We do have to think because, we have to sell product and make money. But some of the things that we think about first is size. So when we are, of course, I did not set up the company. We were already running for many years. But one of the things while setting up or even running is what we say minimum competitive scale. Like you need to have a basket of products. We need 5 products, 10 products, 15 products. Again, depending on the segment and depending on the capability we bring. So if it's phosgenation, you might not need that much. We run a multi-purpose plant. So we need at least 10 to 15 products because each of them have a different buying cycle. So we might not be sustainable if we are making only 3, 4 or 5. So we need to at least that much of thought and that much of sort of strategic choice we have to make. We have to decide that we should be able to make 10, 15 products. And again, it need not be right away. Maybe you start with a friendly customer, who gives you assurance for a few years of business, but you do have to get to that level. Of course, next is selection. This is hugely important as for anybody else. We do have to have the right product. Remember, these are generics, so anybody can make them. and people do. A lot of people make this, and as I said, we can sell only based on the specification. So there is no price premium because everybody's product meets the spec. So the atropine sulfate that I make it meets that standard spec that the Indian government has. The competitors also meets that. So there is, even if I have a, like, suppose 0.1% is the spec and I'm assuring 0.08 or 0.05% impurity, people are not going to pay me a premium for that. In fact, this is a little frustration for me. We were exhibiting at one of these pharma expos. So, you put up a booth and you're talking, you have your product product list and all that. So, and we had just developed atropine, and it's a complicated product to handle. It's not synthesis as well as it's hygroscopic. So you have to control the moisture, dehumidification, all kinds of things. So it was the end of, we were all tired also. So one of the trader comes up to me, he looks at the sheet, hey, atropine kitne ka diya? So it's like buying chana on the market or something like that. So those things can get frustrating because it's a generic industry. So the product selection does play a role. So again, based on the market, obviously our own capabilities, we should be able to handle the chemistry and the processing. Lot of it is also on the customers. So we know who the customer are. You have to sort of validate that they will buy these product at this price, and kind of that assurance from them ki itna to lenge, saal mein itna lenge, aap is price band mein rakhoge to lenge, aisa. So these kinds of things do go on. Then after that, sales, really I would say it's opportunistic. So one is selling more to the existing customers, what we have, either same product or new products that we make. And then typically there is sometimes supply disruption because your competitor kind of has some problem with raw material or plant or something, they are not able to supply the market. That's when, if you are ready, you have stocks, you can step in, and then if you do a good job of satisfying them with your supply, then they can switch over to you. Again, it's all contingent on price. Nobody pays more than 10-15% price premium in this market in India. Regulated markets is a different story. And then for us, innovation in this particular, I'll talk about innovation in the academic industry interface, but in this, it's basically customer driven. So these are incremental changes, right? Some packaging changes. They are not talking about process or anything. The spec has to meet. They are happy with that. Maybe some packaging, something else, or particle size distribution sometimes matters to them, even though it's not in the spec. For the formulator, sometimes that makes a difference in how they compact their tablets. So those that can be tailored with crystallization techniques. So those things can happen based on customer requests. Then on our own, it's process changes. We are looking to continuously improve our cost because of it's a generic model, right? So for us, what I call industry changing innovation. So like fundamentally, we have come up with a totally different way of making it. It is rare as a small industry, right? Those things happen at a larger, and that too, it's a generics industry, right? Any questions on that? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I do. And actually, I was going to refer. No, I mean it's not a slide point, but part of the interface with academia. So this is a point. I mean, I have been looking at continuous for the last 2 years. Of course, last year because of other focus areas, it got put in the back burner. But definitely continuous, and in a small setting. For example, 2 places where continuous I'm looking at is, one is where the cycle time is long, so 24 hours, 30, it's cooking in the reactor, right? So we would like to shorten it with the intensification. Second is safety. So we are constantly worried about safety because ultimately it's the person at the plant, adding, turning something. So you want to take those issues out of the operator's hands as much as possible. So don't want to leave anything for human decision, human error, or many things, right? So some of the reactions that are trickier, continuous does help. And I personally see a huge advantage for those targeted things. As you know, continuous, obviously it starts with batch and ends in a batch, but those specific points, I think there will be a advantage for us. Okay, so that was the first part. The next part is more, I would say, open-ended. The reason is because these are very large and substantive topics and hard questions. So it's not like one person can have an answer to all of these. So my goal is literally to present, what I see as opportunities and barriers. And then since, we have the leadership of the department and institute here, maybe it sort of gives rise to some ideas that people can really start looking into, understanding the issue and then possible solutions. Okay. So I was thinking about this, right? So when we think of industry and academia, are these really, in chemical parlance, immiscible phases? Because there is, how much of commonality is there really in these two settings, right? So if we look at these axes or these sort of dimensions on the output. So from an academia standpoint, the output is graduates, the output is research, maybe some policy. For industry, it's products and services, their output. So where is the commonality here? From a stakeholder standpoint that drive the agenda, I'm broadly calling it regulators for academia. There's educators, faculty and other educators involved in the institutes, and then of course students, right? From a industry standpoint, there's shareholders, employees, customers, we can say suppliers, there's a broad swath there. And then as a result of all this, there are metrics. So for academia, largely they're education oriented or community oriented metrics, and for industry it's financial. So literally, where is the common, like how do you find something that bridges these things, right? That is where the challenge is, because we can't say, okay, academia have to suddenly, adopt financial metrics or care about products and services that the industry is developing. It's just not possible. You have to, somewhere that it has to, the gap has to be bridged, right? So that is really a sort of root source of the problem. So whenever we start talking about this, I think this is important to think through. And when we talk of, okay, what is possible? So the core questions are, okay, which areas are we talking about? What are the reasons for cooperation? And for anything to happen and track, are there ways to make a metric out of it and track this? I feel these are some of the things that one can think about. There will be others. Like I said, it's not that, I'm the expert and having the final answer on this, but this can be a framework to at least start. Specifically for this discussion, I wanted to talk about these two areas. So one is talent. So obviously it is flowing from academia to industry. So what are the requirements that industry has, and how much should academia pay attention to those requirements for the talent that comes out of academia? And the second area is the funding of projects. So obviously funds are flowing from industry to academia and the output from academia to industry. So the emphasis for me today is more on the talent side. I thought quite a bit about it, and so I wanted to spend more time on this. The second part is going to be a bit light. Okay, so when we think of talent and moving from academia to industry, the basic question is, okay, what are the skills that we need at the workplace? Because that's what people have to acquire, and where do they acquire them, right? So first off, so I've split it into entry level, and of course the skills change as they should as people become more experienced and move into senior management. So the first of, I feel, are these three basic requirements at entry level, and of course nothing really goes away at senior management. We need this all the way. So attention to detail, communication and teamwork. As soon as people start, they need to have these skills and demonstrate them all throughout. Then as we go further down and get more experience, these are some of the things that people, again, this need not be an exhaustive list, but these are the main ones I feel. Priorities and resources is learning how to prioritize between projects, what resources are needed, time management, those sort of things. Risk assessment becomes really critical. As one becomes senior management, we need to be aware of what are the risks involved in certain decisions, safety, quality. So there has to be training and awareness on how do we assess our decisions. And stakeholder management is again this kind of buzzword where at a senior level, you want to be in a corporation, you want to be aware of who are all your stakeholders from like board of directors, shareholders, employees, suppliers, all those skills. So they become relevant there. But for today's discussion, so as I was thinking through it, for me it seems like naturally the focus area should be here. When people are starting out, as they come out of academia, these are the skills that they should possess, so they can in industry, they start sort of hit the ground running, if you will, right? We don't want to, while okay, priorities and resources and all, how to assess that could be important, but it's not really required, and it depends industry to industry, and it's the industry's job to train them and as they develop, right? But coming out of academia, these are really important. So this detail orientation and quality, this is actually I feel one of the things that is lacking in our industry. Now there is a caveat here that my exposure in my work, obviously there's not a lot of IIT graduates that I meet, but meeting our own or interacting with our own employees or our suppliers and customers, and in general the whoever I interact with in the pharma industry, I find there is a huge gap in this aspect. And by detail orientation, and the purpose of this slide is, see, in pharma you would have heard, when something goes wrong, it becomes big news, right? So the tragedy in the US where eye drops were shipped to the US and people became blind because the eye drops had contamination from bacteria. Now that was missed by the formulator in India. Then the cough syrup, I think you would have heard. So cough syrup was adulterated instead of polypropylene glycol, ethylene glycol got into the formulation, right? Now those things happen, and we can discuss if there are questions around it, what were the root causes and why it happened, but it all came down to somebody missing out an important piece of detail, or it wasn't written in an SOP in their quality system. It literally came down to that. It's not like somebody shipped, or there was some how shall we say, plan to, or somebody bought ethylene glycol to cut costs and purposely added. Obviously nobody is doing that. It was mislabeling, it was somebody missed out, they did not sample it correctly, or they did not sample all of the raw materials properly, and that goes back to procedures, quality, and understanding how a high quality system should work, and that goes to level of detail. So I'll give an example from my own company. So we had an issue with a reactor so we apply vacuum to the reactor for some distillation, and it's an old reactor, and it suddenly bulged inwards after we applied, and some small amount of vacuum, now I don't remember. So our team got together, luckily there was nothing added to it. It was empty when we applied the vacuum, so no impact to product. So the big thing is, something happens, we have to assess, okay, is there an impact to product? So I say, okay, nothing there, so no impact. Okay, now what are we doing? We are replacing, we'll replace the reactor, take the reaction something else. Now why did it happen? Okay, there are stiffeners around the reactor, so they corrode, because the stiffeners, there is obviously outside the reactor is a jacket, right? So we put in utilities, and it's made out of MS, the stiffener. So the stiffeners can corrode. It was a 25-year-old reactor. Okay, stiffeners corrode, it becomes weak. Oh, okay, fine. Chalo, ho gaya? Chalo, next batch. Okay. Then after, but we have 5 other such reactors, 25 years old, right? Now, can it happen to those reactors? And if it happens during a process, what do we, how do we assess them? So nobody paid attention to that. And in fact, this was cited in a regulatory audit. So we had a European audit, and they asked us, how come you did not record this as a deviation? So it's considered a deviation, right, your reactor. And how did you not investigate it fully? Why did it happen, and are there other reactors that are susceptible to this? So then of course we did it, and we understood stiffeners and how to evaluate the stiffeners, and post that, I had to get involved, and we did a detailed analysis. The point I'm making is, we are not trained to do that. People are, okay, stiffener, theek hai, pata chal gaya, move on, make a, put it in a new batch. Now that has to be addressed through this attention to detail. That's truly that I do believe that, and that leads to this what I call this virtuous cycle of quality. There are multiple other examples also, which we can cite. And the point is, I mean, talking a little bit larger picture, if we have to be globally competitive, we have to have global quality standards, right? And global quality standard means setting up right processes and having that quality assurance that pharmaceuticals and other places require. And okay, I'm writing it on the slide that as India's leading institution, this place should play a role in that. Again, I'm not saying that it's IIT graduates, like we all learn, right? So first time when it happens, we all learn and we can adapt. But okay, in companies, and large companies also have this problem. It's not like we are a small manufacturer. Larger manufacturers also have same issues. FDA cites people, European authorities cite people all the time. So how do we solve that? So, yeah. So I feel that we are happy at that surface level. So once literally the European inspector asked, then people started thinking that okay, how can we assess the other reactors? So we are happy what we say, corrective action, preventive action, right? So if something happens, we are happy with the corrective action. Are ye problem, we fix the problem. So reactor mein kuch breakdown ho gaya. Okay, if we could have fixed the reactor, we would have fixed it. That was unsalvageable. So put it somewhere, take the batch in another reactor, batch is okay. But why did it happen? Where will it impact? How, that mindset is not there. Now, why that is not there is like a philosophical question. Why are we not? Somebody has to force us. So I also feel sad, like why do we need Europeans and Americans to come and ask these questions? Practically, like no Indian auditor asks, by the way. They would have seen the same deficiency report, because we have to keep track of all our deficiencies. Like okay, this incident happened, so they'll say, okay, reactor fix okay, okay. Similarly with batch, some batch fails, impurity profile, 0.1%, 0.15 ho gaya. Okay, what do? We reprocess it. Okay, now it's passing, fine. Why did it happen? Now what do you do to stop whatever has happened? Reaction thoda 70 ka 75 ho gaya, whatever may be the reason, but that thought process in depth is not there, right? Literally you have to force it, it's not natural. So why that is, I am also struggling. So I do that job asking, okay, why did this, how do we prevent it next time, like that.
Yeah, good question. I think it's partially built into our genetic DNA.
Yeah.
Some sugar. That's one problem. Second problem is that we have never been really quality conscious. I think as chemical engineers, we need to include in our syllabus some quality management system.
I think so.
I think your QMS system,
QMS and what that means.
You must have implemented in your setup.
Yeah.
It's something that we don't even hear about until we come up against CSO and
correct.
I think that is, these seem to be some root cause analysis of life.
Right.
Why we are, as a society, we don't really, we want to get by.
Correct.
Beginning with our students and our coursework.
Yeah, so exactly. So I know that is the core kind of this thing of the institute. But to get people ready for work, again, I mean, at an institute level, I don't know if we'll solve the whole thing, but at least to make them aware that attention to detail matters. Like, think through this. Okay, something has gone wrong. So, we for industry, they have this framework of 5 whys. You keep asking why 5 times. Okay, 6 times, 7 times. Some institutional guidance around that.
Some root cause analysis and some analysis. I think is something that we should try to fit into some.
So how that's possible? Yeah. Okay. Okay. What's this? This is, yeah. If it stays on a long time, it does that, is it? Escape करके? Oh, it's frozen. How am I doing on time? How am I doing on time? हम इधर घड़ी नहीं, अब कितना टाइम है? दो ही है. Just look at my watch.
So while you're waiting for the slides
Sure.
to start moving, so I was just wondering, so you have the output of academia, output of industry, right? So one thing that struck my mind is that there's a product over there on the output of industry, and there's research over here. So shouldn't it be the perfect fit, the perfect match?
Yeah, so I was
Draw on that,
right.
and give your comments on
Sure.
what you've learned
Right.
from your experience in industry.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, we have a couple of slides on that, so happy to talk about that.
And so there was also this one slide that said unhappiness of existing customers. So is that in terms of the quality of the?
Yeah, yes, it can be either quality or delivery schedules. Because in small industries, what happens is we are basically not making that much inventory, and our demand profile is also not like, I don't know today what my 3 month sales outlook is. We literally get orders for the next month. So it's very hard to manage inventory. So we do it kind of, हाँ ये इतना buy करेगा, last year किया था. So some little thing, but that can go wrong. Not go wrong means that the customer faces some other challenge. So last time order किया, इस बार नहीं किया ऐसा. So if they suffer supply disruption from the competitor, sometimes that happens because the competitor is not ready. Then they're like, where can we buy atropine sulfate, for example? So if we are ready, happen to be lucky. I mean, there's a little bit of luck that we are okay. 2 week mein, I can give you so much atropine.
Does the customer choose a API supplier based? One thing is delivery schedule.
Yeah.
Apart from that.
Quality, I mean, that's underlying is quality because you need to have your licenses. They will in India, they are actually not required to audit us, surprisingly. I think the new Schedule M, they are now making that more stringent. So the formulator has to come and audit the API supplier. Till now, it was not mandatory. So it was only based on our license. So they will ask for our license and buy the API.
Given that
And some question.
have to be the same from all suppliers. So what is it that makes the quality of one supplier better than the other?
So there is a little bit of this touch and feel. So they say, आपका ये थोड़ा yellow लग रहा है color. ऐसा इस पे things like that also. ये free flowing नहीं है या उसका free flowing. Luckily हमारा ये white ही होता है always. So आपका वो जो दूसरा बेचता है उसका yellow आ रहा है last 2 batches. So आपका अच्छा है material ऐसे. No, it's literally like the generics is a very tough business in India. So when you have, because people can switch in India. There is no, see, we don't have this, there is a concept called the dossier. So where, everything is written and who is your API supplier and, you will use material only from that supplier for your marketed product. For US and Europe and other countries, so for example, an atropine formulation marketed in the US, there is a dossier which they submit in which they have to specify who their supplier is and they cannot change that. And to change it, it's a big sort of thing. So that once you get in, it helps you. So India mein the switching cost is it's very easy to switch. Yeah. Okay. So the related concept and the next skill was communication. So attention to detail, and I'm focusing on these two as a, how do we bridge the gap from, or how do we train the students coming out of academia for an industry. So here also I find a lot of, and again, as I said, my sample size is not IIT graduates, but I think again, of course we can think of within IIT, but then as a model for other institutes also. So generally I think of communication as, the think, write, think loop. Initially, we have all these thought processes, whatever topic we are thinking about. Of course, in IIT, this should not, we don't have to train how people to think. I think naturally, there is a certain level of rigor. But then we do have to force people to write it out, because after writing, the thinking becomes more clearer. And then again, we have to have this loop. And the importance of writing, again, to tie it back to, there are obviously a lot of advantages, a lot of work that we have is done with written communication. But for especially the pharma industry, the quality system that Professor was also talking about is all written instructions. So we have to have the ability to, write well and be clear and be specific. So without that, lot of our SOPs, and I have examples where the SOP was not clear. So in fact, it feels so like I've been in situation where the inspector reads the SOP and he's like, you have not done according to the SOP. So then we are staring there, I'm staring, because obviously I'm not spending time at individual SOPs. Then like, okay, no, he meant it this way, that way, then you have to explain, then, by the time it's a lost cause, right? But more than that, I mean, one is explanation, you are not following the same, two people are not following the same procedure. So that's, of course, talking from a pharmaceutical person, but obviously there are advantages to writing and communicating well. So I don't know how much of a problem here it is at IIT, but training students to really write well can only be a positive, according to me. So linked with quality improvement as well. So this is just a fun, I think, I don't know if you mentioned, I sometimes write in the Economic Times. So this was an article I wrote based on Apollo 13. I don't know how many have seen the movie Apollo 13. The famous line is, Houston, we have a problem. But they have this line, do we have a procedure for that? In the movie, I think 5 or 10 times. So NASA was working on written procedures, So I kind of compare that and the need for written procedures in our systems. So I think it's a vital component. Okay, so the next topic, and as I said, most of my time I spent on the first one around training. This is a little bit, and this is an extremely complicated topic. It's even more complicated, I think, than the previous one. So I'll have an attempt at, what I think. Okay, if we think of projects, funding, and industry needs some activity done. Of course, academia has research and ideas. So how do we bridge the gap? So there is a spectrum of that, right? So one is, what is happening is there's an idea and it just happens to meet resources. So it's opportunistic. Somebody knows somebody. Hey, I'm working, in academia, and then you find an industry sponsor and it just works. But we can't obviously rely on that. On the other end is really the systematic, where people are identifying critical problems, either industry or nationwide, and that need the solutions. So how do we do that? So, okay, of course, all this to happen, some of these things have to be in place, and the requirement for this increases. If you want to be here, obviously you need a longer term vision. It cannot just be that, okay, few researchers are working, then let's find them some resources from industry. There has to be a vision for that. Systematic procedures, and how do we collect all the information that the researchers are working on? How do we disseminate it? How do we attract industry interest? How do we set up procedures to track and fund and those kind of things? And the depth of engagement between the two obviously has to increase, right? But the critical thing is, it literally depends on where we see this as. So this is a tough problem, right? There are needs all the way. There's nothing, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with, people have some ideas. Okay, how do we get them some funding that some industry might be, willing to fund, they like and be willing to fund. So this was like a mental model that I came up with. It really obviously needs both support from both ends, academia as well as industry. So within academia, some of these are required, like obviously commitment. I've purposely left it vague, whether it's at institute level, department level, or some core group level. That I think it depends on, the people discussing and formulating this plan. But definitely this is important, market value driven. There has to be some acknowledgement on the research community on how do we assess what we would say the value proposition in consulting. Like, what is this idea really? I mean, will the customer really pay for it? Like, that has to be the, what am I competing against? Will the customer really pay for it? That has to, that kind of industry sort of sanitization check has to happen, and researchers, either they themselves do it or there should be somebody helping them do it. Then a lot of things, I think, in academia, like industry problems, need multidiscipline, right? It's never, there are few where, so like what Pankaj was talking about, like I'm interested in continuous. So that's a fairly narrow problem where one expert could be of help. But other problems such as drug delivery or any new dosage forms that require multidisciplinary, different skill sets to combine. So there has to be an approach in academia to solve for that, right? And then the final step is coordination, internally as well as externally. And similarly for industry, so when academia is also collaborating with industry, they should have these things in place. Leadership focus, of course, important, again, depending on the criticality. At that initial stage of some tactical work, okay, a smaller group has the funds, maybe they will, they can make their decisions. But if it has to be the CEO and those levels, they have to be engaged. Culture and processes are hugely important. Like I've seen, of course, we are a small company, but in larger companies, there is a lack of culture around, what is the value of research? How do we, it's not just, okay, I've given a project and I need the return in, 5 months or 1 year. There has to be, a culture in the industry that appreciates these longer term projects. And obviously, academia also has to understand whether the industry is set up that way. Otherwise, it can be a problem, right? Problem definition, of course, is one industry is able to define what exactly are we looking for, right? Without that, things don't move forward. And then coordination. So, in my mind, this is like a metaphor. Only when these are balanced, this will work out, right? If it's not there, one of the elements or few are missing, it will be like a tilted bridge that people are walking across. So, I was thinking that this is one model to think through. Now, obviously, it needs both parties, but since we are here at IIT, okay, the point is, okay, on its own, is there something that IIT can do? So from my sort of standpoint, from a small, okay, it doesn't matter small or large, like continuous is a problem that I'm deeply interested in. So what are the ways to, work with somebody in IIT? We were even talking of certain specific areas like, so we do chiral separations or chiral molecules. So the standard way is to just separate through the separation, but that's obviously expensive and inefficient. So if you can make chiral synthesis, so for some molecules that we are interested in, if there is a basic route of synthesis and process that somebody develops, I mean, we have the R&D capability pilot and to scale it up, right? So how does one engage on these small projects? So I'm not talking some big, developing a new molecule or a new drug delivery system, but these are the things certainly I'll be interested in. So how do we develop on those? Okay, so I will leave you with this thought. Again, thank you very much. I hope this was a useful session to learn about pharmaceuticals in this. And any questions are welcome. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, it's very valid what you talked about these four components, both for academia and industry. So, when I think about market value driven research, if you take your PhD thesis, or if I were to think about my PhD thesis, it's all about discovering something very new.
Sure.
And that is what excites most of us in
academia. Right.
So, it's very difficult for a faculty to start putting value to that.
Right.
So, the way I look at it is that if someone from academia were to present these results to industry, and if there is someone on the industry side who looks at it and can actually take those results and actually see how it can be applied, that would be something that would be very nice. Because many a times we do not know how to commercialize it.
Exactly.
Right? We find something exciting, we come up with something, but I think people on the industry side, but then they have to also have that vision.
Yeah.
They should have kind of, read about or know that particular area to say, yeah, this is something. Because it's very difficult in academia to come up with a finished solution. This is what much more, at least the Indian industry is looking for a final finished solution which you can immediately take for production.
So I think that's where the gap is. Like that's not possible, right? I mean, it's not possible, and that's an unreasonable expectation also. So to answer your question, you're absolutely right. And okay, I didn't mean this to be that all research has to be because there is research for research sake. So my research was it kind of pushed the frontier a little bit in our understanding of how peptides can be stabilized, and maybe eventually it would lead to something, not just our group but some other group develop something which results in some commercial application. But how does one really understand whether we are far away from there or are we near to that? So what is that? What is that forum of engagement? Like, do we have a panel where you call the relevant industries? So drug delivery. So like mine would be drug delivery, and say, hey, this is, just give us your feedback on, are we? This is basic research at this point. Like, do 10 more years and then we'll talk, or are we couple of years from really something happening? I mean, and that is not meant as a, go no go, right? Of course, the researcher should continue the research. It's research for research's sake, right? But I mean, if that's of interest, that can, I mean, something like that has to happen, right? In a structured manner where there's a forum and
regular basis meetings that we tell them to do.
this is what we're
See
doing.
interest, they will take it up.
Then. So some interaction is required for that to get feedback. And something simple as, I think we were discussing at lunch, or some of the, again, I understand, like, different, each researcher will have different interests, but at least the ones maybe who have interest, like facilitate going to industry, like somebody, let's say, I mean, as I said, we are a small company, but if somebody is working on new synthesis things and want to visit and say, hey, like, what are you guys actually doing, and maybe they get some ideas based on, because sometimes ideas come from, okay, you are doing this, oh, okay, you are doing it this way, but I have a way to maybe shorten your synthesis time or whatever. We can get some ideas from there. So at least industry visit for professors or researchers.
Sure, the one thing which I noticed, interviewing students, there are a lot of language students of course, constitution, what do you think is appetite for small scale and even medium scale Indian industries to hire PhD students?
Yeah.
Because I think what would help is you have trained researcher who will come in, and the fact that they're trained, they might at least think a little bit more than, let's say, an undergraduate or a master's level person, because of just by the training. So that might facilitate of some innovation. So I don't know whether we have hit this virtuous cycle where people come up with ideas and which result into some benefit and a commercial gain, and that leads to more PhDs coming in. So
Sure.
what's the sample you have observed? What is the thought process?
So for us, I mean, for our size, I mean, see, we are open to hiring new, talent from as a researcher, PhD. In fact, we had hired a couple. So I'll tell you and I'm not complaining about this. This is reality. So they will join us, and then after a couple of years after learning, obviously you go to a Syngene or the larger firms. So obviously we will hire in organic synthesis and things like that. So as a small scale industry, I think you will find across the spectrum people who are interested and don't see it as a cost center. See, if you go to people and say, are you viewing it as a cost center, you will not find that appetite. So we are more into like, okay, let's, okay, we have been doing this for many years. Is there a different way? Can we get a 5% yield improvement? Can we get a 10% yield improvement? How do we do it? So obviously we know that you need to invest some resources in that, right? So, and if it's a PhD scientist that can help us do that, so we are okay with that. But yeah, you will find a spectrum around that. Does that answer your question?
More or less.
Okay.
How about your other interactive?
Yeah, so not as much, because their focus is, see what happens in generics, you get into a little bit of the dhanda mindset ki, you want to, okay, customer ko itne mein chahiye, how do we do it? See, it's all linked, because then quality norms are suffering because kuch reprocessing ho raha hai, people are doing something and jugaad mein chal raha hai. So okay, I don't want to get into all that little underbelly of the industry, but there are things like that also. In generics, you mean? So yeah, I think like this paracetamol and all that, it has been, because at 200 rupees a kg, you cannot, you cannot afford that, right? So at our scales, so like our product values are from like 10,000 rupees up, our APIs, because it's small. Our batch size is like 10 kgs to 50 kg batch size. Paracetamol batch size is 3 tons. So, so we are at that. So obviously our volume is, total sales volume is less, but by definition the value per kg is more. So there is scope for improvement, because naturally when you have that margin, you say अच्छा कुछ गड़बड़ है तो चलो, until you feel some pressure like okay, or a competitor like atropine sulfate, one new competitor has come now last year, so now we are like boss, we have to improve our MC, we have to improve our yields. So how do we do that? So it kind of goes in that way. So, but that's, I'm talking now API product, right? So we make only product. The services side, there's much more appetite. The CROs, because that business model is services. People, the multinationals will give them the projects, right? Hey, we have the 1 gram need, 5 gram need, whatever need for these NCs. So they are doing NC research. So there is a lot more need and requirement for PhD scientists, because you've got to figure out from scratch, what the ROS is and how do you make this thing quickly. And there are small industries there as well, the CRO space. So I think, so I don't know, I mean I know 1 or 2 players, and that need is there, because there literally is no blueprint. Generics mein kaisa, there is a blueprint, no process, somebody knows the process, so you can at least start with it. In the CRO space, a brand new molecule, there is no, you can't like copy from anywhere. So there's a requirement for PhD at all levels.
Step back from generics, step back from small industries. One of your top 3 products, I think worldwide, was amoxicillin, right? It's an antibiotic, and we all know that antibiotic resistance is really one of the biggest problems. So if say Indian industry needs to tackle this problem, which is rampant in India. So how do you think we could change some of those business models that exist for industry? Because one of those outputs, again, one of your last outputs was finance, right? So could you comment on that? Could you give your thoughts on that?
Ultimately, the investment made by industry, so antibiotic resistance, I know a couple of people who have incubated companies, and I think I know one company in either US or Denmark, I can't remember the name. The problem in investment is precisely that they are not seeing the return. I mean, these people have been successful in raising money, but I'm saying there's not much more widespread, because till now it still feels a little far away problem, right? Like, okay, some cases are rising. So the companies are not seeing that return. Okay, even if we get whatever the hit rate is, I don't know for antibiotics, because each category, how many you start with and how many you end is slightly different. So assuming we do the math of that, like what it's 1.2 or 1.3 billion dollars for a regular pharmaceutical to come into market, right? Something that like NC is what we have heard. For antibiotic, that could be some number. But if we did that, how much of runway we will get to sell it and what profit we'll make. So that calculation, my understanding, again, it's not making sense to a lot of people. So somewhere government, so the solution often becomes the government subsidies or some, like for vaccines, I mean, it's a crude comparison. But for COVID, like they had the prepay orders and all that, they gave assurances that we will buy. If you make it, we will buy so much. We'll already give you the order, so you make it. So if something like that comes around, then industry will function. Not function. They will spend the effort, right? I mean, COVID is a great example, right? Even for COVID, the industry needed a guarantee of from the government, we will buy X million doses from you, so go and make it, right? Where it was a clear and present problem. So in this case,
Finance is key.
Cash is king. Whatever cliche we want to use, Yeah.
The last question,
So you were explaining that suppose you are making some product and you are making it under some quality range, and some other generic companies also making in the same quality range, then both are equally sellable.
Yeah.
So can you please explain that what is the difference between a generic company and the other company?
When you say other, as in, so there are two types of, in the sense, in the pharma world, it's generics, mean the patent has expired.
Okay.
Generic means the patent on that molecule has expired. So anybody can make it. Literally, there is no restriction on making that product. So like, for example, atropine, we make it. There are 2 other companies who are making it. Tomorrow, another company can start making atropine. There is no restriction on that. And the other model is where the patent is still active. So the patent holder can make it, that's the only one, or if they license it to somebody under their license, some other, whoever they allow can make it, basically without breaking the law. There could be others who are violating the laws and making it. So those are the two basic ways of or business models or whatever types of molecules in pharma. Does that answer your question?
So nowadays, even in hospitals, there is one separate section for generic.
Yeah, okay, so that's a little technical. So, okay, so when we buy paracetamol, so paracetamol is the active ingredient, but we will buy, I guess, Dolo is the brand name, or Crocin is the brand name. So the companies, it's actually exactly the same, means, of course, the company is different. So, by the way, it's API plus other stuff, excipients as it's called in the tablet, right? So these two companies would have used different excipients, but the actual active is the same. So then companies are selling what we call branded generics. So it's still a generic, but it's branded. Now this, I'm not 100% sure of the law, but when we say India generic sales, it is sold only as paracetamol. There is no brand associated with it. There will be some manufacturer name, they have to give that, because otherwise licensing and all is, they have to have a license, but it is sold as a generic paracetamol. There is no brand associated with it. Those are cheaper.
Thanks, sir.
That we come to the end of this this lecture. Please join me in thanking Tushar again for a very engaging lecture. Professor Bellari, could you please come up and present a memento to?
Yeah, I think you also need to.
Thank you. Before we end, I'd like to thank several people who've made this function possible. First of all, let me once again thank Tushar for accepting our invitation and for giving this talk today. I'd also like to thank Pankaj and Anu for their very generous support of for this seminar series and for initiating this lecture. Thank you, Professor Vangikar, for coordinating this overall program. I think he's just had to step out. I'd also like to thank the Estate Office, the VMCC staff, CDEEP team, Dean ACR and his office, and especially Sneha and Rahul for all the help with the arrangement and the logistics. And of course, as with every other function in the department, thank you very much to Mr. Sudhir Doble for coordinating all of this and making all the arrangements possible. Finally, thank you very much to the audience for staying late and attending the talk. I'd like to invite all of you to join us for tea outside. Thank you. Thank you very much.